Welcome to another one of our conversations. Today we have the added voice of Philip Quah, along with Jay Sawyer and Paul Sparks, and this is Paul Cameron, and you're on the Paul and Paul Show. This time we're going to talk about leadership. And when it comes to missional engagement, community engagement, working in the neighbourhood, obviously leadership is as important there as it is anywhere. What sort of leaders best operate in that kind of work?
One of the fun things I think we can do around this question of leadership is to even begin with an earlier question of what is worth following. What is worth following? Because oftentimes there are assumptions made around that word leadership that you end up losing a lot of the guides and mentors and truly people who are exhibiting things that are worth following by disqualifying them as a leader. So I think in the neighborhood especially, one of the earlier questions is what kinds of gifts, skills, qualities, fruits of the Spirit, etc., are being exemplified by characters in the neighborhood that are truly worth following. And that person may not essentially be characterizing leadership skills and abilities, but they are absolutely worth following per se. And that brings out all the bizarre characters you see in the scriptures where Jesus and the apostles and so forth are finding value in oftentimes people you least expect. So I like starting the conversation even with that preliminary question. All the while, I do believe that there are some important skills and gifts for leading well in the neighborhood. I like the beginning point of that, what is worth following.
And so maybe that's a helpful way of reframing the question, because we've possibly oversimplified leadership and we've created a caricature of what leadership should be in the kind of world that many of us have lived in.
I find that's a challenging thought. I would say that's the language that I've used or I have used in the past is this: we have leadership recruitment that's around the cream of the crop. You know, a certain type of person. But there are communities out there that don't have cream of the crop; they just have the crop. So in terms of the standard of leadership or the quality of a leadership that we would traditionally have in terms of local churches, some of these missional communities or groups that are out there don't have that kind of leadership. And so I actually think we've got to shift a little bit around some of the stuff that you were saying, Paul, that there are kind of people that do have the skills and the maturity who may not necessarily tick all the boxes.
The stereotypical leadership boxes.
Yeah. And actually to start seeing them as a part of our leadership. And actually, I think the challenge in that is, I think if we're talking about leadership, there's a number of different forms of leadership. There's leaders who just naturally, because out of who they are. Then there's leaders who you can help in terms of, we recognise a skill or a form of integrity that may not identify even with the Christian faith, but they still have something to contribute. But then there's leaders who are also leading movements. And those leaders, I think, are some of the people that do need some form of theological training and some form of reflection, that we can take them on a journey where there's some deeper learning experiences. And then maybe it's not just them, but maybe it's overall that we need to engage everyone. But how we do that, I think, is probably the challenge.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that different leaders emerging, some out of who they are, some them being recognized and trained into it, and some because of their expertise in contributing to the parish. Different areas, could be business, could be community, could be music, could be anything out of their expertise. But I'm also looking at perhaps there are tribal leaders as well there because granddad has been a big guy and everyone just listens to him because of his position. But any form of this leadership that's coming up, it's managing leaders I think, would be a key issue when you're running it. Would you think so, Paul?
What do you mean to say when you say you think managing leaders is a key issue?
Yeah, if they're all excited about what they can do, or some could be a leader but their voice cannot be heard because a tribal leader has said no. So how do you manage that? Because you want to grow as a community, then it's a leadership management issue.
I've been working around some of the work that Ronald Heifetz has done around adaptive leadership, and he suggests that the last couple of decades we've been working around a form of what he describes as technical leadership, which is in situations that are fairly standard and certain. You might have, here's the 10 steps to solve your dilemma, and that in a relational environment like the parish, or in a complex environment like we live in today, those type of kind of coded answers end up eliminating all the possibilities that you can find by nurturing curiosity and storytelling between those in the parish. And I think that's what you're getting at a little, Phil. I think we've got to create the kind of space where a leader, I think a leader in the neighborhood, Paul, is the kind of person who doesn't say, I've got the answer and here's where we're going, but is capable of bringing all parties together to work on the opportunities and problems at the peak level of their capacity. Drawing out the voices that aren't heard, and maybe some settling of those who are maybe working above where they ought to, and controlling the conversation, and creating that space where you can be sensitive to what is God saying here, and what does God want to do. I think that's something that often isn't even gotten after in the adaptive leadership, is how can you be a leader in the sense that you bring people together to recognize their need for God and for divine support and divine guidance. That takes a certain type of leader who recognizes their own weaknesses, who recognizes even the inabilities of the group to solve all the problems, and the need for the guidance of the Holy Spirit as well.
And so leadership is always a team.
Yeah. At bare minimum, leadership is always drawing together the team. If others aren't in a place where they're ready to lead necessarily, at minimum, you're talking more about metaphors like coaching, like facilitating, like a conductor of an orchestra. Much more so than kind of technical top-down forms of leadership. And this brings up a good question of what metaphors might be good for us to reimagine with leadership. You've got the old ones of kind of captain or army metaphors and such.
Or Moses.
Yes, yeah.
How important is it to, in neighbourhood engagement, how important is it to define yourself as a leader? Like, we like to put that leadership mantle on people very quickly.
Yes.
Either in or out, you are or you're not.
Yes.
Yep, I think leadership you grow into. And a lot of the training that I've done, I think the most effective form of training is actually I'm walking alongside, or someone's walking alongside of me, and there's some form of withdrawal and reflection on myself. And actually, I've done the theology, I've done some of the things that ticks the boxes that are significantly important. But I feel like we put this mantle of leadership on people either really quickly, and we often have a culture where we have you're in or you're not in terms of leadership. But I'm just trying to play around with that in terms of, is it important to have that idea that, in churches we call ourselves, I'm a part of the leadership team, I'm part of the leadership group. Is that important in terms of neighbourhood engagement?
I think where you started, Paul, about something and someone or a group of people whose practices and habits were worth following is a healthy way to consider how that could be manifest in the neighbourhood community.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's less of a concern about the titles per se, but I do think that we need to reimagine what leadership means. In the old days, leadership was always equated with influence. And so many Christian leaders, you would say, if you want to know if you're a leader, you to turn around and see who's following you.
Sure, yeah.
But I always used to think to myself, well, what would Jesus have said on the cross if he turned around and saw nobody following him? And I think the new question is there a way of thinking of leadership more in terms of faithful presence and more in terms of the kind of person who can help people come together to work around their problems and possibilities than the one who's saying, I know the vision, everybody follow after me, you know?
And that sits very comfortably with me, with that approach, but I can understand how that approach for some communities would breed a sense of anxiety because there's a little less control in that, and it's a little hands-off, and how things outplay
And look,
or roll out is...
absolutely, and that's part of the tension that we live with. And I'd like to invite whoever's listening to continue to wrestle with that understanding of leadership, because it's changing and it's contextual, and we've got to be careful about just applying that stereotypical approach that would be too easy to do. So thank you very much, guys, for contributing to the conversation. I think there's a lot more that we could talk about leadership on another occasion. So thank you very much.